All right, so welcome to the latest installment of Highlander Newsroom. I am your host, Jonathan Fernandez, editor-in-chief of the Highlander newspaper. And today at the table we have
Adam Alvarez, assistant radar editor.
Evan Ismail, managing editor.
And Samuel Harrison, opinions editor.
How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Today has been pretty productive, I think.
Yeah.
Doing pretty well myself, too. I can't complain. Pretty busy, but Tuesdays usually are. So it's a sign that things are going well.
Especially with the quarter winding down and everything. But we're going to get started with ASUCR, as we usually do here on Newsroom. So ASUCR passed 5 pieces of legislation last Wednesday, including a bill to stand in solidarity with the graduate students at all UCs. We know the grad students at UCSC and UCSB are currently striking for a cost of living adjustment in pay. Other legislation was focused on standing in solidarity with AFT, the union representing librarians and non-Senate faculty, transparency over vetoes, and the one I really wanted to discuss was the bill that would require stipend increases to take effect the following year after the proposed stipend increase was passed. This bill was interesting to me because obviously Executive Vice President Abigail Cortez had proposed the stipend increase for herself about 2 weeks ago. So that proposal ultimately failed. But it was interesting to see Cortez argue against the bill that was presented at last week's meeting. So, I mean, were you guys surprised at all that this bill passed? And you guys think it's kind of like a direct response to Abigail's original proposal?
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised that this bill was passed this past meeting. I do think that it was in direct response to Abigail's proposed bill the past month, but I am happy to see that they're moving in the right direction with more transparency. So in that way, I'm really excited to see ASUCR take the right steps.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I was also surprised. I guess I wasn't so surprised that Abigail Cortez, and I think it was Elections Director Diana Castaneda, spoke out against it because Abigail was the one that wanted the stipend increase to begin with, and she wanted to be able to get that back pay. But now with this passed, she's not going to be able to get it. So I think it was definitely like a good step. And I think it's just like, I think that's the right thing to do because you shouldn't, that seems like a loophole to like be able to get back pay right after you passed it, even though it's like supposed to be for the next incoming class.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it just makes sense that you don't get back pay from a bill that increases the stipend for the next person. So
yeah, I agree. I feel like I am surprised that it did pass, but I honestly feel like it would have been difficult to argue against the bill to begin with because I don't really think there's many reasons you should be like receiving that back pay. And if you really do believe that like this stipend increase is important, it only makes sense that you would want it for your successor.
I thought so. I was more surprised. I thought for sure that it was going to fail just because I don't have much faith in this body. And I was actually very happy to see that so many members of the Senate who don't normally speak up during the meetings actually supported it. Like there were some people who I've never heard speak. Like I didn't even know what their voice sounded like, and like they're up there like saying they're like, I think this is a good bill. I think it would make us look better among the student body. Like this is something that we need to pass. So it was definitely a positive sign. I think especially since we've had so many like problematic things come out of ASUCR in the past few weeks. Although I will say that I was really surprised by the vote. So the vote was 8 yeses, 0 noes, and 4 abstentions. So I thought for sure that there were going to be more noes. I was just like, okay, like there's going to be it's going to be like contentious. But the fact that there were 4 abstentions, I think just goes to show that there are a lot of people who on the Senate who don't want to be associated with trying to take on the powers that be in ASUCR. I think that's a big motivator behind it. Otherwise, you should have just voted yes. I think it's disappointing that there isn't more members of the Senate willing to speak out and go against the EVP. I think that's really disheartening that it's like, you're put there by the student body to represent the student body. Clearly, the student body wants this, yet you aren't, you don't feel comfortable. I could say harsher things here, but I'm just going to keep it a little bit more kinder. But I mean, you don't openly oppose, which I think is really a shame. So, but I think it's just, aside from that, I think it's a positive thing. I'm really happy that's, I think it was definitely a positive piece of legislation from President Pro Tempore Ramirez.
Yeah, and I think piggybacking off that of what you said about how hearing about people speak up who haven't really spoken before in past meetings, I think that's really important with a lot of the resignations that have been going on as well. I think it's important that that we introduce more voices into the Senate chambers and that more people speak up about the issues that really matter.
Yeah, I agree with that because like with all the resignations, I think it's been up to 6 Senate resignations. And so at this point, like it's hard to even know who exactly is up on that horseshoe. So like them speaking out, I think is definitely important. I also wanted to ask you guys, what did you think about her argument, which was like, if we're going to stand here and support COLA, like cost of living adjustments for graduate students, we shouldn't be trying to stop students from trying to increase their own stipend.
Yeah, I definitely don't really agree with that argument. Fundamentally, I feel like it's a kind of a weak justification to shoot down the bill. I definitely think that these are two very different situations here, where one side is trying to raise their own stipend while the other side is trying to vie for the institution to raise their pay. So really, it's two extremely opposing sides. So drawing a sort of similarity between them is kind of fundamentally wrong.
I was very upset, actually. I was kind of offended by her bringing that. I thought it was just a very convenient thing to do, like a very politically convenient thing to do. Is like, it's not, this bill isn't saying that you're not allowed to assert your worth. You're more than welcome to assert your worth. It's just going to take effect for the other folks that are after you're gone, because this position isn't, graduate students can't live, okay, like on the salaries that they're making. This has nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing to do with that. I think it's really a shame. I honestly think that it was just a tactic just to get people to sympathize, because if you flip the narrative to it saying that you're anti-labor, then if you vote against it, then you're a villain. And so I think that, this has nothing to do with that. This bill is just saying that you can't be greedy, because public service is not for you to be greedy. It's for you to serve. And I think that was what this bill was about. So I was actually quite offended that's what she was trying to flip the conversation to include, was that it was about, an anti-labor type of message. And it's just like, no, you're not allowed to be greedy. Like, that's what this is. I think that the issues are completely separate. This isn't a labor issue. This isn't, a cost of living issue. This is like a literally just somebody trying to milk what more than what public services is there to do. And that's not right.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Evan. I feel like it was a pretty underhanded tactic, and I believe that if she truly believed or if anyone truly believed that their position is worthy of like a stipend increase, then they would believe it is like their successor is like deserving of that increase.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if you feel like your position is underpaid, you're more than welcome to make a case for why you feel that position should be paid more. By all means, like, please. But, it's not right for you to like, that's just not right. Like, if the U.S. government can't do it, then what makes ASUCR any better? Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I think actually they're due for a pay decrease, to be quite honest. There's no reason why a student position should be making almost $10,000 a year. It's a student position, no. Like, I work 2 jobs, like I don't think that's fair. And, ASUCR isn't for you to come in and line your pockets. And so I think that's pretty much what's happening with these ECAB positions. So if anything, I think they should be decreasing the pay, especially since so many people who are currently serving on the Senate, including the president himself, said that they would decrease their pay during the elections and during their campaigning. So, kind of like to see where that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, at least not from this body, but yeah.
Well, we definitely have a quarter left to see.
Yeah, I guess so.
I also mentioned the other bills that were passed during the meeting. What other bills do you think kind of show that ASUCR is heading towards, I don't know, like more positive stuff?
I feel like the resolution to come out in support of the COLA strikers is heartening. I don't really know how much ASUCR can do to support them, but I do think that it is good and important to like put our school like on the list of names of like people who support these wildcat strikes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that getting their support is an important part of building a legitimate case as the graduate students try to vie for their pay increase. So I think it's a great step for them to definitely show their support.
I think it shows that the undergraduate students want their TAs to be paid more.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that, having the student governments on board, since they are there to represent the students, is important, because I don't really think that you can say that. I mean, they work hard. I mean, the graduate students are working really hard. And I don't, and I think most undergraduates realize that and don't think that what they're doing in Santa Cruz is right.
All right, now we're going to transition to an op-ed written by Chancellor Wilcox in the LA Times. In that op-ed, he discussed the importance of the SATs in evaluating students who apply for college. Wilcox acknowledges that these test scores can be influenced by family income, parents' education, and race, but that the UC has been able to offset these concerns by also evaluating other factors. Some of the factors he mentions that UCR specifically looks at is whether the student is first generation or low income. He wrote that eliminating the SAT would cause universities to rely more heavily on other measures that could be equally if not more biased, such as grades. He brings up grade inflation in certain communities compared to others. So do you guys agree that the SAT should continue to be considered when evaluating students who apply for college?
I think that the SATs are a valuable asset in evaluating a student's aptitude. I was very fortunate in being able to take it twice in my time in high school, but I know that many of my colleagues at the time were not able to take it at all, and that definitely hurt them. So I feel like their knowledge base and their wisdom and their level of being smart was evaluated by the SATs of not having a score, and being looked at that by the universities definitely impacted their admission, as they were not able to get into the places that I was able to. So I definitely think that eliminating it would be able to increase that barrier.
I think the schools shouldn't rely on it as much. I think it serves a purpose to a degree, just to see, how well you can perform in these areas. I didn't do very well on it. I just didn't. I'm not good. I don't like these tests. And I'm happy that I was able to get into a good undergraduate institution. I also was able to take it twice. And I just think that they shouldn't rely on it as much, because I think there are a lot more factors that can prove how good you are, how ready you are for college, than, a test that I think is kind of arbitrary, personally.
Yeah, no, I agree. I understand. He mentions in his article that the grades in general do present their own bias of their own, and I understand that argument, but at the same time I do feel like it's kind of distracting from the main issue here. He doesn't outright deny that the SATs can be discriminatory. And I feel like that is to bring up the grades is distracting from the importance of fixing the SATs. I feel like the op-ed would have been better if it had presented some sort of solution in making the SATs better, rather than just saying they're staying and that's the end of that.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with that point. I feel like SATs overall have become very over-centralizing in the university process as when they're trying to find applicants. So I think eliminating the big tests like SAT and ACT are only going to help students and help universities really by looking at other factors besides just these two big tests. Because really, if you get a 1600 on the SATs, every single college is going to want you, and every single college is going to look at you.
I mean, I'm curious as to what they would use aside from the SAT. So it's if grades are also biased,
that's what I was thinking too, because he mentions if there was no SAT, then you'd have to focus more on grades, but then he also says grades are biased. So it's just then what should you even be looking at?
Right. I mean, because I think a lot of people would have a problem with relying more on ethnicity or race or family income. I feel like these are a lot of really contentious topics that I don't really feel like the university would be comfortable coming out and saying yes, we are more in favor of this over these grades or the SAT. I mean, I don't even know what they would use. Chancellor Wilcox didn't really give us an idea about what they would do if they didn't have the SAT.
Yeah,
so I'm kind of curious as to get his take on that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a big problem that I have with the op-ed personally, is just that it's not solution-based at all. It's really just him vying for why SATs should be an important part of the process, but really he's giving no alternatives at all, and that's a huge problem.
Right. It's a defense of the status quo, but I feel like everything can be biased to a certain extent. I just feel that the fact that the SAT has been researched and has been proven, or there's a lot of research regarding it being discriminatory towards students, especially students of lower economic status, socioeconomic status. I feel like that alone shows that there should be some sort of solution mindset when approaching this issue. I feel like there's nothing to be gained by just defending the SAT outright.
Exactly. And as the chancellor, I was really saddened to see that he wasn't taking a more proactive stance at looking for something that could be used differently.
Something he mentioned in the op-ed was the fact that UCR considers low income and first generation students. Do you feel like that mitigates the SAT bias in any way?
I feel like it's an important component of the college application. I mean, I don't know if I feel like those probably correspond together. So if you have a lower SAT score, you're probably from a lower socioeconomic background, just because I don't think I'm mistaken that they correlate. I mean, because I imagine that if you're wealthier, you can afford more prep materials, you can afford to take it more often. So I think that it's an important component to kind of like weigh with the SAT, because if I think the university should be prioritizing these types of applicants, because I mean that's the only way you're going to achieve social upward mobility. So I think that I think that it's something that they should take with the SAT. I don't know if it could necessarily be an appropriate indicator, eliminating the SAT and only relying on that though.
Yeah, and I think just going back to what you were saying, having more opportunities and having more tools at your disposal to help you with this test is going to outright help your performance no matter what. And the access that people have to these tools is very limited for lower income families. So I feel like the test is almost centered around that, because the College Board puts out a new study guide and a new book every single year. So really, if that is the recommended study material that you want to have, then why are you requiring people of lower socioeconomic status to pay $200 just to have access to it?
I'm curious if they weigh AP scores. Because, I mean, you can report your AP scores, and, like, those obviously factor into, what college courses you don't have to take. But it's like, do they weigh those, because, like, I feel like if you're taking the SAT and, like, maybe you didn't do well in the SAT, but you have really great AP scores, like you got maybe a 4 or a 5, I feel like that's definitely a good indicator about how ready you are for college. Because if you were able to wipe out, I was able to wipe out most of my lower division requirements for political science. So it's like, I feel like that's a really good indicator about how well you can handle college material and how well you're going to do in college than the SAT is, because I don't think college and a college environment is even remotely reminiscent of an SAT test room. I think it's more reminiscent of what you would be doing in an AP course. So I think that those are probably something that would be maybe more telling than something like the SAT or the ACT.
Yeah, and I know at least for the grades portion, obviously you get that boost for like the GPA, but that would definitely be interesting to see. Now we're going to segue to another news piece that Sam wrote. So last Thursday, UCR hosted New York Times op-ed columnist, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, David Leondhart?
Leondhart? Yeah.
Yes. As part of the 51st Hayes Press Enterprise Lecture. Leondhart won the Pulitzer Prize in 2011 for his examination of the federal budget deficit and healthcare reform. Leondhart started as an intern for the Washington Post in 1994. So from reading the article, it seems like he spoke quite a bit about how journalism has changed during his time in the field. How exactly did he say it's changed over that time?
I mean, he said a lot. The event was an hour and a half, and it was honestly fantastic all the way through. I think like the biggest like takeaway message though, in terms of like how journalism as like a field has like progressed over the last couple of decades, is like the fact that like we're slowly shifting more and more towards that digital platform. Like he opened up his lecture with like a pretty funny anecdote. He was like an intern with like the Washington Post during his like summer, I don't know which summer it was, but it was during like a summer session, and he wrote an article on what I believe was the building of like a sports stadium or something, kind of just like talking about the politics of it. But in the article he misspells the one of the editors the publisher of the Washington Post at the time, like he misspelled her name, and like his main message kind of from that, he insisted that it illustrated his point that in today's society, if someone saw the publisher's name misspelled in an article, we would immediately be told about it, and a correction would be issued to the online edition, being it was quite some time ago when this article was published. So by the time it hit the prints, it was there was nothing they could do about it, and he was not invited to come back for the internship following that little debacle. So the digital platform is especially has accelerated journalism as a field. Today we have tools graphics that we can add to our articles to further illustrate our points. Back in the day during typical newspaper print journalism, if we had a pie chart, we might have 3 different sections with varying shades of gray, but that was really all you got out of it. Today we have full-on graphics that can move and you can interact with as a reader if you look at the online edition, and some of Leonhardt's articles reach upwards of 8 million views, and he accredits that not just to his good writing, but to the graphics that he implements into his articles. So I thought that was really cool. But he did have a few critiques of the field. First and foremost, local journalism is sort of dying off. Unfortunately, people just aren't publications, newsrooms are being disbanded, and it's just not as constant as it used to be as we're making that shift to like digital media. I'd say that it's likely that like with like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all these other publications being as big as they are, they sort of like dominate that print side of journalism. On top of that, people are much more distrustful of the media compared to what they were like 20 years ago, and maybe rightfully so. There's a lot going on all the time, especially during this election season, the one past. And for his last point, it was actually directly related to that disinformation. He believes that like the prevalence of disinformation in the media and just the material we consume online makes people distrustful of just about every institution, honestly. He had like a few like graphics that demonstrated how like people's like trust in like various institutions in the United States has like declined over the years. So he kind of like talked about some ways to improve that.
I wanted to turn this kind of like into a more broad conversation because I know us three specifically want to get into journalism once we graduate. Yeah. How did that talk like leave you feeling after the lecture?
I think it was pretty inspiring because on top of like I would say that he had more bad things to say maybe about the field as a whole, like compared to the good things, but he also offered like a lot of solutions, primarily being like the idea that we as journalists should just like try our hardest to like listen to the people that are reading our publications and like accept that criticism, and also like offer up like explanations on like how we do like our stories, like how we do our reporting, so that there is like a trust is built between journalists and the people that read our work, because that is like really the only way to like combat like that like distrust of the media right now. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, and a lot of the people that I spoke with after the event thought so as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that's important. I think consistency of voice is definitely a huge part, not only in just a news sense, but in any form, whether it's ops or even entertainment. Being a really consistent reviewer and having a nice repertoire of reviews where you like this certain category or don't like this certain category is really important to building a relationship with your viewer.
So I wanted to end with the radar piece that Preeti wrote. How are you doing, Preeti? Preeti's now joining us.
I'm doing good. How about y'all?
We're doing all right. Glad to have you here to close out the show. So Soundclash was hosted by ASPB last week. It featured student artists and groups that were invited to perform, and the winner gets to perform at Nooners during spring quarter. Do you know like how many Nooners they get to perform, or like how that works?
I believe it's one per week during spring and
so they
fall.
get to perform just once per week.
Okay, so Nooners are once a week
but do they get
Wednesdays.
to perform every Nooner?
No, they'll only perform at one, but I believe they'll be either the first or the second one to go up. So that'll be a really cool opportunity for them.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask like what the atmosphere was like specifically at the beginning, like how many students were there, how hype was it?
I think more people started to come by as the event kind of progressed. A lot of people stood in line for the free shirts and tacos. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. But, overall, I think it was really cool to, be waiting in line and see the, bands start to do their mic checks and, warm up and stuff. Lots of different genres on stage. So it was really cool. But in the beginning, it was a little slow, The first band, Blue Season, was pretty familiar, actually, to the UCR community. Last year, when I was working with AS, I remember we actually invited them over to perform at our event. So they're pretty well known around this area. I was pretty familiar with their work. Their kind of fusion of jazz and blues music. I mean, they're called Blues Season for a reason. But yeah, I think overall, all of the artists were good. After Blue Season was, I believe, Vonnie. A lot of people came out to support him. Lots of his friends came through, and I think he had pretty good flow and good beats. Next up was, I believe, Amara. She was pretty interesting too, like a solo female artist, the only female artist there on stage, I think, apart from the next artist, G. Bautista, it's named after the guy, Gabe, who's like the main singer, but he actually had a full instrumental backing and he had this one girl performing with him. Yeah, they were really good, actually. They were really bomb. I liked them a lot. They had really good saxophones and, soulful vibes, I was like, is this Winter Solstice Part 2? But, I think the winner, Delfino Squared, was well-deserved. Like, they did incredible. I'm an indie rock fan, I listen to a lot of music, but lately I've been listening to a lot more, like, underground rock and indie music, and they were honestly spectacular. So I'm really happy that they won because they deserve it.
Haven't they won before? I feel like they won the last Soundclash. No?
No, so they performed last Soundclash. They didn't win. I forgot the actual artist who won, but yeah, so the winner last year actually performed at the House of Blues, which is, a reputable area, but Delfino Square did attend Soundclash and competed last year, didn't win, but this year they won and they really deserved to win too. They came back full throttle, I'd say.
Which band or artist was the crowd most excited for? Who did they get most excited for?
Delfino Squared. I mean, there were so many people cheering them on, fans that, are already fans. But also, I think a lot of people, indie rock is kind of one of those genres where, you just tend to like it because it's, instrumentally, it's pretty chill, unique. People tend to like it. And I think that the judges did a good job of choosing them.
Did you have a favorite song that was performed that you remember?
Nope.
You can't remember?
No, I mean, like, the whole event, it was like, I will say there was a lot going on. Like, they were just kind of going, like, back to back to back artists' performances, and they didn't really announce their songs as well either. So it kind of was a blur, but I think overall their sound was good, and that's what really attracted them. I mean, realistically, like, Soundclash was like the preliminary screening, essentially, for the Nooners. So
Yeah.
it makes sense why they did it like that.
Do any of the bands and like performers that played that didn't win, like, do they still, like, can they still perform at the Nooners or no?
No,
Oh, dang.
I know.
I'm curious, what was the overall general atmosphere like at the event? It was held outside at the hub, like always, but can you give me a little more detail about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty chill. They had the stage set up in the Hub Plaza area. Like, they had, like, Indian-looking rugs on the ground, which I was like, okay, for sure, repping the culture. Overall, it was pretty chill. I don't have much to say, honestly. It was really straightforward of an event.
Yeah, if anything, check out the article. Preeti wrote a great article, so make sure to check that out online, highlandernews.org. That's about all the time we have for today, so thank you to all our listeners who tuned in. This was Highlander Newsroom.